honored to be here today. Very grateful, right? And I start off with gratitude just because, to be able to ask to share my testimony, which I relate to, is also my experience, strength, and hope, right? People wouldn't have been asking me 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, right? I was just so selfish, so self-centered, and I was crazy, right? And today, God has restored me to sanity, right? And only God could have done that. And so, kind of putting on these grateful lenses, if you will, I get to see what God has done for me, right? And doing for others. Just a little story just about my background. I mean, I grew up in a very loving family. And I grew up in the Catholic Church. I was an altar boy. I used to read at Mass. People would suggest, "Oh, David, you should become a priest." I mean, that's how far But I knew I wanted a family at some point, and I never had that calling. And then fast forward, through my early college years, I lost my mom at an early age, 18, right? And it was just her time to go. She was sick for a number of years, and shortly after that, I in college, I was just kind of off and running, and I found alcohol and booze, and I liked what it did to me, and I, joined a fraternity, and party is what I did, right? I think I just lost all sense of like who I was and the values I grew up in. And so even though I didn't have a problem or, believing in God or understanding God, right? I never kept or maintained a connection, right? I was doing David's will by the time I was, 18, 19, 20 for a number of years. And my will got me in trouble. And I've learned that when I take over the steering wheel, because I'm not connected to God, then that selfishness takes over. And I start crossing on the toes of others, and life gets miserable, right? And so I would always turn to that solution, which I knew would give me some relief, and that was the drink, right? Alcohol. And I repeated this cycle for 15 years, right? And I couldn't stay sober more than a few months, and I didn't know why, right? And I would only turn to God and do the 911 help when I was in real trouble. And I was down some real spots, but for some reason, after a couple of weeks, when life got a little bit better, I would let go of that rope that God would send out to me, and I would take over the steering wheel again. And so I had to be humbled, right? And basically humbled to a point where, to me, the most powerful prayer that one can say, and the simplest, is, "God, help me," right? And I needed to say that and surrender. Right? Dylan had mentioned surrender at the end of the Bible class, and that just resonated with me, because surrender, along with acceptance, is probably my two favorite words in the English dictionary, right? And I can tell you, a handful of years ago, I couldn't surrender, right? Because my ego wouldn't let me, right? I need to do David's will, right? But I realized that surrendering is nothing more than the willingness and the opportunity to join the winning side. When I was able to put that definition together, nothing more than the willingness and the opportunity to join the winning side, I said, "Okay, God, I think I can do that," right? And it just started this process of recovery for me, where I'm in a position now, that I can share the message, give my testimony, or help others who are in need, right? And I feel that's one of God's will for me, right? To continue to be of service, right? Because if I can put God first, and do prayer meditation to find His will for me, which, like I said, is continuing to help others who have struggled or are struggling with addiction, right? Then everything else falls into place. Then I can be the best husband I'm meant to be, right? The best father, right? And be of service to them, right? And that's so important as well, right? I being not only of service to others, but service to my family as well, right? And I remember when I got married, my wife and I got married in COVID. My father-in-law married us, right? And I remember specifically he said, wake up each morning and ask your wife or your husband, right? What can I do for you today, my love, right? And we don't say it every day, right, all the time, but it just, when we do say it, it's like it helps us remember that, I need to be there for my family and for those who are still struggling, right? I'll just wrap up by saying, my connection with God has to be number one, right? Because I've proven to myself, when I cut off that cord, when I let go of that rope, and I don't make a daily attempt to connect with God on a higher power, right? Or Jesus, right? Then I start going down a path that's selfish and self-centered again, and life gets a little too much for me, and I know that I will pick up that drink again, right? But I know that's just a temporary solution, right? Only God can fill this hole that I didn't even realize I was carrying or had for so many years, right? And it's God's love that makes me feel complete and whole, right? So I'm grateful today. Thank you, Harry, for allowing me to share my testimony today, and be in a position where, I want to keep doing the next right thing, and I want to keep knocking on God's door, right? On the daily, not just that one knock, but keep on knocking, right? On the daily, right? And I'll end with one of my favorite prayers. It's God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self so that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that I may help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Thanks.
I get to pray for my buddy. So it's been a privilege to have David as a friend. It's just I keep seeking for new relationships, and